There is a specific kind of moment when searching stops, but nothing has been found yet. It does not arrive with clarity or celebration. It does not feel like success. It feels more like a pause that wasn't chosen, where the impulse to reach outward simply doesn't activate. The mind may still scan out of habit, but the urgency behind it is gone. You are not looking for confirmation. You are not assembling meaning. Something has settled into place quietly enough that effort no longer knows where to go. This is not the relief of giving up, and it is not the satisfaction of arrival. It is subtler than both. It is the sense that whatever you were bracing for no longer requires preparation. The internal posture you carried for so long, the leaning forward, the constant calibration, the emotional readiness for something to finally shift, has softened without instruction. You did not decide to stop seeking. Seeking simply lost its momentum. Notice how different this feels from waiting. Waiting is tense. Waiting watches the clock. Waiting is oriented toward a future moment that will justify the present. This is not that. This is a present moment that no longer needs justification. Time feels less important here. Not slower or faster, just less relevant. You are here without checking where here leads. There is often confusion at this stage because the mind expects movement to feel dramatic. It expects something to announce itself. But what stabilizes first is not circumstance, it is orientation. The internal noise that once interpreted every sensation as a signal has grown quiet. Not suppressed. Resolved. And in that quiet, a different quality of attention emerges. Broader. Less pointed. More receptive. You may notice that you are no longer rehearsing conversations with reality. No longer bargaining, visualizing, or correcting your inner state. There is less emotional micromanagement. Less trying to be in the right frequency. That effort belonged to an earlier phase, when instability required constant adjustment. What replaces it is not passivity, but steadiness. A system that no longer overheats. This steadiness does not feel special. That is how you know it is real. It feels normal enough that part of you might overlook it entirely. But normal here does not mean familiar. It means sustainable. It means you can remain without effort. And what can be remained in without effort is what the field can finally respond to without distortion. Nothing needs to be done to activate this. Anything done to amplify it would only introduce noise. Recognition is sufficient. Allowing it to be ordinary is sufficient. Remaining calm without explanation is sufficient. This is not a peak. It is a baseline. If you sense that this description is pointing to something already present rather than something to attain, that is the signal. Not because it proves anything, but because it doesn't need to. This phase does not persuade. It stabilizes. If you want to remain within this frequency and continue in this alignment, subscribe and stay here. At a certain point, the world stops trying to get your attention. Not because it has withdrawn, but because it no longer needs to compete with your inner noise. What once arrived as intensity now arrives as availability. The dramatic signals fade, not as punishment or loss, but because they are no longer required to break through. Earlier phases depend on contrast. Emotional spikes, sudden signs, sharp turns, and unmistakable jolts serve a purpose when attention is scattered. They interrupt momentum. They force awareness to look up from its habits. But once attention stabilizes, interruption becomes unnecessary. The system does not shout when it knows it is being listened to. This is often misunderstood. Silence is mistaken for absence. Neutrality is mistaken for stagnation. The mind, conditioned by intensity, assumes that if nothing is pulling at it, nothing is happening. But that assumption belongs to a state where awareness could only register through friction. When alignment deepens, perception refines. What changes first is not the environment, but what you register as meaningful. Notice how your sensitivity has shifted. You are less reactive to stimulation. Less hooked by novelty. less compelled to assign meaning to every fluctuation. This does not mean you are disconnected. It means your baseline has changed. You no longer need contrast to feel oriented. You no longer need reassurance to remain steady. Responsiveness replaces excitement. And responsiveness is quiet. It does not demand emotional spikes to prove itself. It operates through subtle adjustment rather than dramatic intervention. This is why nothing feels like it is trying to convince you anymore. Convincing only happens when doubt is still active. When doubt dissolves, confirmation becomes redundant. There is also a change in how time feels. Moments stretch without tension. There is less urgency attached to outcomes. The future no longer feels like a resolution point for the present. This is not because desire has vanished, but because desire has softened into trust. And trust does not scan the horizon constantly. It allows what is relevant to come forward on its own. Silence, here, is not empty. It is saturated. It holds more information than noise ever did, but it requires a different kind of attention to register it. A relaxed attention. One that is not trying to extract meaning, but is willing to notice what is already coherent. This is why the absence of signs can feel unsettling at first. The old markers are gone, but the new ones are quieter. Nothing is trying to get your attention because your attention is no longer fragmented. It is available. It is present without being tense. And presence does not need to be chased by experience. Experience arranges itself around it naturally. This phase asks for a subtle shift in interpretation. Instead of asking what is missing, notice what no longer feels necessary. Instead of waiting for confirmation, notice how little reassurance you require. That reduction is not loss. It is efficiency. It is alignment becoming economical. What you are experiencing is not the end of movement. It is the end of noise. And from here, responsiveness becomes precise rather than loud. There is a point where emotional movement stops swinging and starts holding. Not frozen, not suppressed, but steady. This is what can be called the stability threshold. It is not the absence of feeling. It is the absence of volatility. Emotions still arise, but they no longer hijack orientation. They inform without displacing you. They pass through without dragging attention with them. Before this point, inner life tends to oscillate. High clarity followed by doubt. Expansion followed by contraction. Certainty followed by urgency. These swings are not mistakes. They are training. Contrast sharpens sensitivity. It teaches discernment by experience rather than theory. Each rise and fall refined your ability to notice what alignment feels like and what it does not. Without those fluctuations, stability would not be recognizable. But contrast has a limit. There comes a stage where repetition no longer teaches. Emotional highs stop feeling expansive and start feeling destabilizing. Lows stop feeling informative and start feeling redundant. This is often when the nervous system begins to seek something different, not consciously, but instinctively. It begins to favor coherence over intensity. Crossing the stability threshold does not feel like an achievement. There is no sense of having won anything. Instead, there is a quiet realization that emotional equilibrium has become the default. Reactions still occur, but they resolve quickly. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer spiral. The internal environment becomes predictable in the best way. You can remain present without bracing. This condition is rare because it cannot be forced. Emotional coherence cannot be manufactured by discipline or belief. It emerges when the system has learned enough through contrast to no longer require extremes. In that sense, instability was not an obstacle. It was the curriculum. Each oscillation trained your capacity to return to center faster, until returning became automatic. Once volatility dissolves, something important becomes possible. Consistency. Not consistency of outcome, but consistency of state. And state is what reality responds to. When emotional signals stop contradicting each other, the field receives a clear instruction. Before this, responsiveness was intermittent. It arrived in flashes, coincidences, moments that felt promising but unstable. That inconsistency was not a flaw in reality. It was a mirror of internal fluctuation. Stability changes this. When emotional coherence holds over time, responsiveness no longer needs to break through resistance. It can meet you directly. This is why crossing the threshold often coincides with a sense of normalcy. Things begin to work without effort or spectacle. There is less drama attached to movement. Less emotional interpretation layered onto experience. It is important to understand that stability is not numbness. Numbness disconnects. Stability integrates. You still feel, but you are not ruled by what you feel. Emotions become data rather than directives. They inform orientation instead of determining it. This allows attention to remain anchored even as circumstances shift. From here, the internal signal you broadcast is clear because it is no longer changing every moment. That clarity is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply persists. And persistence is what makes responsiveness reliable. You did not arrive here by avoiding contrast. You arrived by completing it. Stability is not the opposite of movement. It is what remains when unnecessary movement falls away. What follows is not an idea to believe in, a metaphor to interpret, or a concept to imagine. It describes a functional shift in how responsiveness operates once stability is present. These are mechanics, not meanings. Nothing here requires agreement. It only requires recognition. Earlier phases rely on signals. Symbols, coincidences, repeating numbers, emotionally charged moments, external confirmations that break through doubt. Signals are effective when attention is unstable because they interrupt. They pull focus outward and force interpretation. They are designed to be noticed by a system that is still scanning, still questioning, still seeking orientation through contrast. As coherence stabilizes, those methods lose relevance. Not because responsiveness stops, but because the mode of communication changes. Resonance replaces signaling. Instead of drawing attention through impact, reality begins to respond through alignment. Things do not announce themselves. They fit. They arrive without friction. They feel obvious in hindsight, and often unremarkable in the moment. This is where many people become confused. They look for the old markers and find none. They assume responsiveness has ended, when in fact it has become more precise. Symbols are loud because they need to be. Resonance is quiet because it does not compete. It matches. Resonance operates through state correspondence. What you hold consistently is what you encounter consistently. Not as reward or punishment, but as reflection. When emotional coherence stabilizes, the need for external reassurance disappears. Recognition activates alignment automatically. You do not need to decode anything. You notice, and the noticing itself is the engagement. This is why interpretation becomes less useful here. Interpretation introduces delay. It turns direct responsiveness into a puzzle. Resonance does not ask to be understood. It asks to be matched. When you are stable, you do not wonder whether something is aligned. You feel it immediately. There is no spike of excitement, no dramatic confirmation. Just a sense of rightness that does not fluctuate. At this stage, responsiveness feels less like receiving messages and more like moving through a space that adjusts itself around you. Doors open without signaling that they are doors. Obstacles dissolve without calling attention to their absence. You are not being guided step by step. You are being met where you already are. If this description clicks rather than convinces, that is resonance at work. Nothing needs to persuade you because persuasion belongs to doubt. Recognition belongs to alignment. If you notice yourself nodding internally rather than analyzing, that is the mechanism functioning as intended. And if this explanation aligns with your experience so far, you can mark that alignment physically. Like the video as an energetic confirmation, not as approval, but as resonance acknowledged. As responsiveness shifts into this mode, effort becomes counterproductive. Trying to extract meaning from every experience reintroduces noise. The system now responds best to steadiness. Calm recognition. Allowing things to be simple without assuming simplicity means nothing is happening. Resonance does not escalate. It stabilizes. It does not perform. It persists. And once this mode is active, there is no need to go looking for signs that it is working. The absence of interruption is the confirmation. This is how responsiveness matures. Not into spectacle, but into precision. Feeling always arrives first because it is the alignment itself, not a reaction to evidence. Before anything can appear consistently, the internal signal must stop fluctuating. Proof comes later, not as a cause, but as a consequence. This ordering is not philosophical. It is structural. When emotional alignment stabilizes, it creates a coherent instruction. Until that point, the signal being broadcast is mixed. Hope layered with doubt. Expectation interrupted by urgency. Desire tangled with resistance. Under those conditions, responsiveness can only arrive sporadically. It appears in moments, then disappears, because the internal state cannot hold it steadily. This is why searching for proof is so disruptive. Searching implies uncertainty. It pulls attention forward into a future moment that has not arrived yet and treats the present as insufficient. That posture fractures coherence immediately. The moment you look outward for confirmation, you introduce a split between where you are and where you think validation exists. That split is felt emotionally, and emotion is what the field responds to. Proof-seeking also compresses time unnaturally. It demands results on a schedule that belongs to impatience rather than alignment. This pressure reintroduces volatility, even if it is subtle. The system begins oscillating again, not dramatically, but enough to distort the signal. What follows is inconsistency, which is often misinterpreted as failure. Calm expectancy operates differently. It is not passive hope, and it is not forced optimism. It is the state of being settled enough that outcomes are allowed to arrange themselves without supervision. In this posture, attention is present rather than projected. You are not waiting for evidence to feel aligned. You are aligned regardless of whether evidence has arrived yet. This is the critical distinction. When feeling leads, reality reorganizes around it. When proof is demanded first, alignment becomes conditional, and conditions fracture coherence. The field cannot respond to conditions that change moment by moment. It responds to what is stable enough to persist without reassurance. Calm expectancy does not try to predict how things will unfold. Prediction introduces mental activity that competes with feeling. Instead, expectancy holds space. It creates a neutral openness where movement can occur without resistance. From this state, responsiveness often feels natural rather than extraordinary. Things line up quietly. Opportunities emerge without announcement. The absence of struggle becomes noticeable only in retrospect. Many miss this phase because they expect confirmation to feel dramatic. They expect proof to arrive with emotional payoff. But when alignment is stable, proof feels understated. It feels like the obvious next step rather than a reward. This is because emotional alignment already resolved the tension that proof is usually meant to relieve. When you stop checking whether it is working, coherence deepens. When coherence deepens, responsiveness becomes reliable. This is not because attention is withdrawn, but because it is no longer fragmented. Calm expectancy does not watch the horizon. It inhabits the present fully enough that the future does not need to announce itself. Evidence is not absent during this phase. It is simply not performing. It does not need to convince you. It appears in ways that fit rather than impress. And fitting is the signature of alignment. Feeling comes first because it is the instruction. Proof follows because it is the echo. Urgency feels powerful, but it is noisy. Intensity feels productive, but it is unstable. Desire feels motivating, but it carries contradiction. Each of these states sends multiple instructions at once, and when instructions conflict, responsiveness becomes distorted. Not blocked, but blurred. The field does not respond to how strongly something is wanted. It responds to how clearly something is held. Urgency collapses clarity by compressing time. It treats the present moment as insufficient and leans aggressively toward a future resolution. That leaning introduces tension. Even when the intention is positive, the emotional signal underneath says something is missing now. That message fragments coherence immediately. What follows is movement that feels forced, delayed, or inconsistent, not because reality resists, but because the instruction is unstable. Intensity operates similarly. High emotional charge amplifies fluctuation. It spikes focus briefly, then drops it. This creates bursts of responsiveness followed by silence. The pattern feels dramatic, but it is unreliable. Intensity cannot sustain alignment because it exhausts the system. The field cannot mirror something that cannot be held. Desire, when it is sharp and unresolved, also distorts outcomes. It points outward towards something not yet embodied. It keeps attention split between what is present and what is imagined. That split becomes emotional, and emotion is the language being spoken. When the signal alternates between having and lacking, responsiveness alternates as well. Stability removes these distortions. Stability does not push. It does not pull. It remains. When emotional coherence holds without oscillation, the instruction becomes singular. There is no urgency layered over expectation. No intensity masking doubt. No desire pulling attention out of the present. The signal is clean because it is consistent. This is why calm is not a passive state here. It is an earned condition. It reflects a system that has learned through contrast and no longer requires extremes to feel oriented. Calm means attention can stay where it is without effort. That ability did not come from avoiding instability. It came from moving through it until it no longer dominated. The field responds to what can persist. Not to what demands, but to what remains. Stability persists. It holds its shape across moments. This is what makes responsiveness reliable rather than sporadic. When the internal state does not fluctuate, the external response does not need to correct or compensate. If you notice that you no longer feel the need to rush outcomes, amplify emotions, or intensify desire to feel effective, that is not complacency. It is readiness. Readiness does not announce itself loudly. It shows up as steadiness. As the absence of internal negotiation. As the ability to remain present without checking whether anything is happening yet. Nothing needs to be added to this state. Adding urgency would only dilute it. Adding intensity would destabilize it. Adding desire would fracture it. Stability is sufficient because it is legible. It is the only language that does not contradict itself. If this resonates as recognition rather than instruction, mark it. Comment with the words, "I am stable." This is not for affirmation, but for clarity. Declaring stability reinforces the state that responsiveness already recognizes. There is a point where effort stops being useful and starts becoming interference. This is the shift from interacting with reality through exertion to interacting through coherence. Earlier phases reward trying, adjusting, refining, and correcting. At this threshold, those same behaviors begin to distort what they once helped create. What worked before no longer fits the conditions now. Control is effort directed at outcomes. It tightens attention around a specific shape reality is supposed to take. That tightening narrows identity. You become the one who manages, anticipates, corrects, and steers. While this can produce short-term results, it collapses bandwidth. The range of responsiveness you can receive shrinks to what fits your expectations. Anything outside that frame is filtered out or resisted. This is why control blocks resonance. Resonance requires openness. It requires enough internal space for alignment to register without being forced into predefined forms. Control replaces that space with vigilance. It keeps attention contracted, scanning for deviation. Even when the intention behind control is positive, the emotional posture underneath it communicates mistrust. Mistrust fragments coherence. When identity is built around managing outcomes, everything becomes personal. Deviations feel like threats. Delays feel like failures. Neutral moments feel like nothing is happening. This personalization intensifies effort further, creating a feedback loop where more control is applied to compensate for diminishing responsiveness. The loop feels exhausting because it is self-reinforcing. Release interrupts this loop. Release is not withdrawal. It is the loosening of the grip on how things must occur. When control softens, identity expands. You are no longer defined by the role of operator. Attention relaxes. Bandwidth widens. This widening allows resonance to operate again, because there is room for alignment to express itself without being micromanaged. Access appears when effort steps aside. Not because effort is wrong, but because it has completed its role. At this stage, effort produces diminishing returns. The system is no longer learning through pressure. It is learning through stability. Control tries to impose order. Coherence allows order to emerge. What often surprises people here is that release does not feel dramatic. There is no moment of letting go accompanied by relief or emotion. It feels more like realizing you no longer need to hold something you have been gripping out of habit. The hand opens because it is unnecessary to keep it closed. Tension drops without instruction. This opening restores resonance. When attention is no longer compressed, alignment does not need to fight its way through expectations. It meets you directly. Responsiveness becomes smoother, less effortful, and less predictable in form, but more reliable in effect. You stop trying to steer and start noticing how movement organizes itself around steadiness. Control belongs to a phase where volatility requires management. Beyond that phase, it becomes noise. The threshold you are crossing does not respond to pressure. It responds to clarity. And clarity does not need to be enforced. It appears when interference dissolves. Letting control fall away is not an act of trust in something external. It is recognition that coherence already functions without supervision. When you stop tightening identity around outcomes, resonance resumes naturally. This is not loss of agency. It is access to a wider one. Allowing is often misunderstood because it does not look like effort. From the outside, it can resemble waiting or inaction. Internally, it is neither. Allowing is an active posture of openness, a deliberate orientation of attention that creates space for alignment to move without obstruction. Nothing about it is passive. It requires presence, not withdrawal. Waiting leans forward. It watches time. It carries an expectation that something should arrive to complete the moment. Allowing does the opposite. It settles fully into what is present and removes pressure from what comes next. Attention is not suspended. It is stabilized. This stabilization is what makes allowing active. You are not disengaged. You are available. Receptivity functions like a widened field of perception. Instead of narrowing focus onto a single outcome, attention remains broad enough to register what fits naturally. This breadth is not vague. It is precise. It does not chase relevance, it recognizes it as it appears. Allowing sharpens sensitivity rather than dulling it. This is why allowing often feels unfamiliar at first. Many are accustomed to engagement through tension. Effort creates a sense of participation. When tension dissolves, the mind can misinterpret the absence of strain as absence of movement. But movement is still occurring. It is simply not being forced through a narrow channel. It is unfolding through alignment. Allowing requires trust in coherence rather than confidence in strategy. Strategy fixes attention on form. Coherence holds attention in state. When attention is held in state, outcomes arrange themselves in ways that cannot be predicted but can be recognized immediately. This recognition is the feedback loop. You do not wait to see if something is right. You feel its fit as it arrives. An allowing posture is responsive, not reactive. Reactivity jumps at stimuli. Receptivity registers them. This difference matters. Reactivity pulls you into the experience. Receptivity lets experience move through you. In this way, allowing keeps orientation intact even as circumstances shift. There is also discipline in allowing. It is the discipline of not interfering. Of noticing the impulse to tighten, steer, or accelerate and choosing not to follow it. This choice is subtle, but it is active. Each time attention remains open instead of contracting, alignment deepens. Not because something is added, but because nothing unnecessary is introduced. Allowing does not mean you stop caring. It means care is no longer expressed as pressure. It becomes attentiveness without insistence. This form of attentiveness is powerful because it does not distort what it observes. It meets reality as it is, not as it is supposed to be. From this meeting point, responsiveness flows cleanly. You can recognize allowing by how sustainable it feels. There is no drain. No build-up. No need to reset afterward. You can remain in it without effort. That is how you know it is active alignment rather than withdrawal. It supports continuity rather than spikes. Allowing is the state where action becomes unnecessary because movement organizes itself. Not because nothing happens, but because what happens no longer needs to be pushed. This is not the end of engagement. It is engagement refined to the point where openness itself becomes the most effective participation. Before perception changes, the body does. This sequence is consistent and often overlooked. People expect clarity to arrive first, followed by a sense of ease. In practice, ease arrives first, quietly, in the background of the system. The body settles before the mind understands why. The nervous system is designed to register safety and coherence prior to interpretation. Long before thoughts reorganize, the body begins to soften its defensive patterns. Breathing becomes less shallow. Muscular tension releases without instruction. There is less startle in response to uncertainty. These shifts are subtle, but they matter. They indicate that the system is no longer preparing for threat or instability. Emotional regulation is the training ground for this change. Each time an emotional wave arises and is allowed to pass without escalation, the nervous system learns something new. It learns that intensity does not require reaction. That sensation does not require collapse. Over time, this learning accumulates. What once triggered immediate response becomes information that can be held without urgency. This is how coherence becomes sustainable. The body learns to remain present without bracing. When emotional states no longer overwhelm the system, they lose their power to fragment attention. The nervous system stops oscillating between activation and shutdown. It finds a middle range where awareness can stay online consistently. This stabilization happens beneath conscious awareness. You do not decide it into existence. You notice it after it has already occurred. One day you realize that situations which once disrupted your internal state now pass through with minimal impact. Not because you have become indifferent, but because your capacity to hold sensation has expanded. The body functions as the receiver because it processes information faster than thought. It registers coherence immediately. When the nervous system is regulated, it can receive subtle shifts without amplifying them into stress responses. This allows perception to refine itself naturally. You see more clearly because the body is no longer distorting input through tension. If the nervous system remains reactive, perception follows suit. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels personal. Everything feels like it requires immediate interpretation. When regulation deepens, perception slows without becoming dull. You notice without rushing to conclude. This creates space for responsiveness to emerge cleanly. It is important to understand that regulation is not suppression. Suppression traps energy in the body. Regulation allows energy to move through without overwhelming the system. This distinction matters. A regulated nervous system is not numb. It is flexible. It can feel deeply without losing orientation. As this flexibility develops, coherence becomes easier to maintain. The body no longer signals danger in neutral situations. It no longer treats uncertainty as threat. This frees attention from constant vigilance. The result is a felt sense of steadiness that does not depend on circumstances behaving a certain way. Only after this bodily stabilization does perception shift noticeably. Clarity emerges without effort. Understanding arrives without analysis. This is because the receiver is now tuned. The signal no longer needs to fight its way through noise. What you experience as calm awareness is built on this foundation. The nervous system learned first. The body adapted before the mind explained. And because of that order, the coherence you feel now is not fragile. It is held, supported, and repeatable. Stability does not force outcomes. It changes what becomes accessible. When emotional coherence holds without oscillation, movement occurs across probabilities rather than against circumstances. Nothing is pushed. Nothing is overridden. The system simply gains access to arrangements that already exist but could not be entered while volatility was present. Timelines are not paths that must be chased or destinations that must be reached. They are alignments. Each represents a configuration of conditions that correspond to a specific internal state. When the state fluctuates, access flickers. When the state stabilizes, access holds. This is not movement through space or time in a dramatic sense. It is a quiet reorientation of what can meet you consistently. Once stability is present, reality no longer needs to compensate for internal inconsistency. Before this, responsiveness often arrived as correction. Delays, obstacles, redirections, and sharp contrasts were necessary to recalibrate orientation. With coherence in place, those corrective mechanisms become unnecessary. Movement becomes smoother because fewer adjustments are required. This is why shifts at this stage rarely feel dramatic. There are no sharp turns or emotional spikes announcing change. Instead, things reorganize subtly. Situations align without explanation. Certain options fade without resistance. Others appear without effort. The absence of struggle can make these shifts easy to overlook, but ease is the indicator that alignment is functioning. Timelines respond to stability because stability can be held long enough for consistency to form. A fluctuating state cannot remain in any alignment for long. It enters briefly, then exits. A stable state does not need to exit. It remains. And what remains becomes the environment you move within. This process does not feel like choosing. It feels like finding yourself already positioned differently. You may notice that conversations change tone without you steering them. Circumstances rearrange without negotiation. What once required management now unfolds with minimal input. This is not passivity. It is coherence doing what force could not. Importantly, there is no sense of striving here. No forward pull. No feeling of moving towards something better. Those sensations belong to instability. Stability has no directionality. It is complete enough that movement does not feel like improvement. It feels like continuation. Because of this, timeline shifts at this stage can feel anticlimactic. There is no emotional payoff. No surge of validation. Just a quiet recognition that certain configurations are no longer relevant and others are now available. The system adjusts without commentary. What enables this is not intention layered with effort, but alignment held over time. Stability gives reality something it can respond to without distortion. Once that condition is met, responsiveness becomes structural rather than reactive. It does not need to surprise you to get your attention. It does not need to test you to refine your state. Movement across probabilities happens as a byproduct of remaining coherent. The more ordinary stability becomes, the more seamless these shifts feel. They stop being noticed as changes and start being experienced as the way things are. This is not ascension. It is not escape. It is orientation. You are not going somewhere else. You are occupying what is already compatible. And compatibility does not announce itself. It simply holds. When coherence is reached, there is no need for disruption. Chaos is a corrective tool, not a feature of alignment. It appears when internal states conflict and attention must be redirected forcefully. Once those conflicts dissolve, precision replaces upheaval. Movement no longer needs to announce itself through intensity. Drama belongs to misalignment because it relies on contrast to create awareness. Sharp turns, sudden losses, unexpected gains, and emotional spikes are all ways reality interrupts instability. They are loud because they have to be. When coherence holds, interruption becomes unnecessary. Awareness is already present. Responsiveness no longer needs to break patterns, it works within them. This is why reorganization happens quietly. It is not building toward a reveal. It is not preparing a payoff. It is simply adjusting components that no longer require tension to be moved. What once would have demanded confrontation now shifts through subtle repositioning. Elements fall out of relevance without resistance. Others slide into place without effort. Silence, in this phase, is often misread as delay. The absence of visible movement can trigger old expectations of stagnation. But silence here is not waiting. It is calibration. Fine adjustments are being made at levels that do not register as events. Nothing feels urgent because nothing is out of place enough to require urgency. Precision operates without spectacle. It does not need to justify itself emotionally. When alignment is stable, changes are exact rather than dramatic. They happen in the smallest increments necessary. This economy of movement is what makes them easy to miss. The system is no longer compensating for volatility, so it does not overshoot or correct aggressively. Another reason this phase feels quiet is because interpretation has softened. Earlier stages trained attention to look for meaning through impact. Now meaning is carried through fit. Things either align or they do not, without explanation. There is less narrative attached to change. Less need to frame it as progress or setback. Movement becomes neutral. This neutrality can feel unfamiliar. The mind may search for confirmation that something is happening. But that search belongs to a phase where responsiveness required proof. Here, proof is not performative. It does not present itself as an event. It is embedded in continuity. The absence of disruption is the indicator that coherence is functioning. When reorganization is quiet, it also means fewer reversals. Loud change often swings too far, then corrects back. Quiet change lands closer to where it needs to be. There is less oscillation afterward. Fewer lessons repeated. Less emotional cleanup required. Precision reduces collateral movement. Silence also protects coherence. Announcing change too early invites interpretation, expectation, and pressure. Quiet adjustment allows alignment to settle fully before attention engages with it. By the time you notice something has shifted, it is already stable enough to remain. This phase does not reward impatience. It does not respond to monitoring. Watching for signs reintroduces noise. Calibration completes itself most effectively when attention remains relaxed. This is not neglect. It is trust in a process that no longer needs supervision. Reorganization happens quietly because nothing is being corrected. It is being refined. And refinement does not raise its voice. There is a moment when wanting no longer points outward. Not because the desire was fulfilled in the way it was imagined, but because the orientation that produced wanting dissolves. The pull forward weakens. The sense of moving towards something becomes less defined. What replaces it is not satisfaction, but embodiment. Wanting is directional. It leans toward an image, a condition, a version of experience that feels separate from the present. That separation fuels movement, but it also sustains tension. As long as wanting is active, identity remains split between what is here and what is anticipated. This split was useful earlier. It generated momentum. It sharpened focus. But it cannot persist indefinitely without fragmenting coherence. At a certain point, the system no longer needs that forward pull. The qualities that were being sought begin to stabilize internally. Not as achievements, but as conditions. Calm becomes normal rather than earned. Clarity becomes available rather than chased. Presence becomes inhabitable rather than fleeting. When this happens, wanting loses its function. This does not feel like giving up a desire. It feels like realizing that the desire has already reorganized you. What you were reaching for externally has become the state you are holding. The pursuit phase ends not with arrival, but with absorption. The signal you were broadcasting becomes the baseline you live from. This is where identity begins to shift. You are no longer someone trying to get into alignment. You are operating from it. The language of effort no longer applies. Questions like, how do I maintain this, or, how do I get more of this, fall away naturally. Maintenance implies fragility. This state does not feel fragile. It feels inhabitable. Embodiment replaces pursuit quietly. There is no declaration, no internal ceremony. You simply notice that certain impulses no longer arise. You are not reaching ahead emotionally. You are not negotiating with the present. Attention rests where it is without tension. This resting is not passive. It is grounded. This marks an initiation into responsiveness because the system is no longer divided. When wanting collapses into being, the instruction becomes singular. There is no longer a signal of lack layered over presence. What you hold internally is what you move within externally. Responsiveness no longer needs to compensate for contradiction. It is important to notice that nothing feels finished here. This is not completion. It is stabilization. The movement that follows does not feel like progress toward a goal. It feels like continuity from a new baseline. You are not trying to become something else. You are allowing what has stabilized to express itself. This phase can be subtle enough to be missed. The mind may look for the familiar tension of desire and find none. It may interpret this as loss of motivation. But motivation has not disappeared. It has reorganized. It now operates without strain. Action, when it occurs, emerges from clarity rather than urgency. When wanting collapses into being, you do not feel elevated. You feel grounded. Less compelled to prove, chase, or accelerate. More available to respond. This is the threshold where responsiveness becomes natural rather than conditional. You have not stopped moving. You have stopped pulling yourself forward. And in that release, movement begins to organize itself around who you are now, not who you were trying to become. This phase is not about reaching something. It is about recognizing what has already stabilized. There is no final moment waiting ahead, no event that will arrive to confirm completion. What changes here is not circumstance, but orientation. Attention stops leaning forward, not because there is nowhere to go, but because there is nothing missing from where you are. The expectation of a climactic event belongs to a phase driven by contrast. Contrast requires resolution. It builds tension so that release feels meaningful. But once coherence holds, tension is no longer being generated. Without tension, there is nothing to resolve dramatically. Responsiveness does not need a finale. It functions continuously, moment by moment, without narrative arcs. This is why nothing announces itself as finished. There is no internal bell, no external signal, no emotional payoff that marks an ending. Instead, there is a subtle realization that the need for endings has dissolved. You are no longer waiting for proof that something has worked. You are no longer orienting toward a future state that will finally justify the present. The present stands on its own. Responsiveness here is ongoing rather than episodic. It does not appear as a breakthrough. It appears as continuity. Things respond as they are met. Adjustments occur as needed. There is no sense of crossing a finish line because there is no race being run. Movement happens, but it does not feel like progress toward a destination. It feels like alignment expressing itself naturally. This can be disorienting at first because the mind is accustomed to milestones. It wants markers that say, now you have arrived, now you can stop paying attention. But this phase does not release attention. It refines it. Attention becomes simpler, not absent. You remain present because presence no longer requires effort. When expectations of a final event fall away, relief often follows. Not relief from struggle, but relief from anticipation. Anticipation keeps attention split between now and later. Without it, experience consolidates. You are no longer preparing for something else. You are responding to what is already here. This does not mean nothing new happens. It means newness is not treated as proof. It is integrated as part of an ongoing exchange. There is less interpretation layered onto change. Less need to label moments as significant or insignificant. Significance loses importance when responsiveness is reliable. There is also no sense of being done. Completion implies an endpoint after which nothing further is required. What emerges instead is stability within motion. You remain available. You remain responsive. You remain open without seeking. This is not static. It is dynamic without being directional. The absence of a final event protects this phase from collapse. If there were a climax, attention would latch onto it, attempt to preserve it, and reintroduce effort. Continuous responsiveness does not invite that behavior. It offers no peak to cling to. It simply continues. This realization is quiet because it does not need to persuade. You do not need to be told that there is no final event. You notice it when you stop looking for one. When nothing feels incomplete, yet nothing feels finished, you are already inside this phase. Responsiveness here is not something you enter once. It is something you remain within. Moment by moment. Without arrival. Without conclusion. What changes here is not what you are, but what you thought you were. The sense of being a separate agent moving through an external world begins to loosen, not through effort or insight, but through recognition. You notice that the boundary you assumed was there has never been stable. It was maintained by contrast, not by truth. For a long time, seeking defined orientation. Seeking created a sense of direction, purpose, and momentum. It gave identity a role, the one who is moving towards something. That role was useful. It sharpened attention. It created engagement. It allowed contrast to teach through experience. But seeking was never evidence of separation. It was a phase-specific posture. Contrast requires a seeker. Without separation, contrast could not be registered. So the identity of someone reaching outward formed naturally. It was not an error. It was a temporary configuration shaped by conditions. And like all configurations, it dissolves when it is no longer needed. What replaces seeking is not detachment. It is recognition. Recognition does not look for connection because it does not experience disconnection. The field you thought you were navigating reveals itself as the same space awareness is arising within. Not merged. Not joined. Simply not separate to begin with. This recognition does not arrive as a revelation. It arrives as an absence. The absence of effort to orient yourself. The absence of the sense that something must be managed between you and experience. The absence of the feeling that reality is happening somewhere else and you must catch up to it. These absences are not losses. They are clarifications. When separation dissolves, responsiveness becomes immediate because there is no longer a gap to bridge. You do not act upon the field. You move within it as it moves within you. This is not poetic language. It is descriptive. Experience no longer feels like a dialogue between two sides. It feels like a single process expressing itself in different forms. The idea of influence changes here. Influence implies distance. It implies one thing acting on another. Recognition collapses that structure. What remains is participation without division. Movement without manipulation. Response without strategy. Nothing is controlled because nothing is external. The identity that once sought alignment fades quietly. Not because it was defeated, but because it has completed its role. Recognition does not replace it with a new identity. It removes the need for one. You do not adopt a new story about who you are. You stop needing a story to explain presence. This does not make experience abstract or impersonal. It makes it intimate without effort. Sensation, thought, and circumstance arise in the same space, without hierarchy. There is no observer standing apart. There is awareness, and what appears within it. The simplicity of this can be easy to miss because it lacks contrast. You were never separate from the field because separation was never required for responsiveness to function. It was only required for learning through contrast. Once that learning stabilizes, recognition replaces seeking naturally. Nothing needs to be concluded. Nothing needs to be added. What remains is not a new understanding, but a quieter one. Not something to hold on to, but something that does not need to be held. Awareness recognizing itself, without comment, without distance, without effort. There is no next phase waiting beyond this one. What has stabilized does not require escalation to remain active. This is not a holding pattern and it is not a pause before something greater. It is a condition that sustains itself because it is no longer dependent on effort, intensity, or validation. You are not standing at the edge of something. You are already inside what responds. What remains now is coherence as a baseline. Awareness does not need to rise or fall to feel effective. It does not need to be sharpened, amplified, or protected. It simply remains present, available, and responsive. This presence is not fragile. It does not collapse when attention drifts briefly. It does not disappear when experience becomes ordinary. It is ordinary, and that is why it lasts. This phase is defined by continuity. Not repetition, not stagnation, but an unbroken responsiveness that adjusts without drawing attention to itself. You are no longer moving between states of alignment and misalignment in dramatic swings. Minor fluctuations resolve themselves quickly. Orientation returns without effort. The system knows where to settle because it has learned through contrast where stability lives. There is no promise embedded here because nothing is being offered in exchange for maintaining this state. There is also no warning about losing it. Both promises and warnings belong to identities that believe something must be protected. What has stabilized does not need guarding. It is reinforced by use, not by vigilance. Calm becomes the indicator. Not calm as suppression, not calm as withdrawal, but calm as clarity without tension. You can engage without bracing. You can disengage without guilt. Experience moves, and awareness moves with it, without trying to steer. This is not detachment. It is intimacy without friction. The field you are moving within remains responsive because you are no longer sending contradictory instructions. What you hold internally persists long enough to be met consistently. This consistency does not create excitement. It creates reliability. And reliability is what allows life to feel workable rather than dramatic. Nothing about this phase asks you to define yourself differently. There is no new label to adopt. No role to perform. identity here is not a concept. It is a condition. Awareness aware of itself, engaged with experience, without division. You do not need to remind yourself of this. The absence of effort is the reminder. This is the phase you remain in because it does not require momentum to continue. It is sustained by coherence, and coherence sustains itself. You are not building towards something else. You are not closing a chapter. You are living from a baseline that no longer oscillates. If you are still here, listening without searching for what comes next, that is the confirmation. Not because it proves anything, but because it does not need to. This phase does not ask for belief. It does not ask for maintenance. It simply continues. If you choose to stay within this frequency, subscribe and remain here. And if this resonates with someone you know, share this with them. Share this with someone who needs to hear this.